Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Surviving IoT, How Telcos Can Thrive in the Next Industrial Revolution. Wherever you are, thank you for spending the time with us today. My name is Robin Duke-Woolley and I'm the CEO of Beecham Research, which is an analyst and consulting firm specializing in the M2M and Internet of Things market worldwide. We've got a great discussion for you today. I'm joined by Dwayne Gabor of VoltDB to discuss the opportunities that the Internet of Things offers for telcos and the leading role they need to play in this unfolding story. We'll be looking at why telcos are uniquely positioned to excel in the age of IoT, the challenges and opportunities IoT brings for telcos, some key characteristics of telcos and networks of the future to adapt to IoT, and some real-life examples of best-in-class IoT networks. So it's a big theme that has many implications. So let me introduce you to our speaker, Dwayne. Dwayne is a 20-year telecom industry executive and oversees Volt's direction and business performance in the North American telecom sector. He's passionate about helping telecoms deliver world-class solutions for their customers. Previously, he's worked in the OSS/BSS space, the big data and analytics space, and the CEM space. So Dwayne, welcome to the webinar.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's a delight to be here, and I'm looking forward to sharing my thoughts today.
Great. Thank you, Dwayne. So there's a lot to discuss. In a moment, I'll start this off with a brief overview of some of the challenges in moving from M2M to IoT and some of the key trends we see in the marketplace. After that, I'll ask Dwayne to present his slides, and after that, we'll have a Q&A session. So just to remind you that this is an interactive webinar. We want your questions, so please ask them and send them to me at any time starting now. Just type them into the Ask a Question window on your screen. We'll address as many of those as possible later in the session. So please start sending me your questions right now. Now, just before we start with the slides, we have an initial poll question for you, which should be on your screen right now. So just answer this in the next few seconds and we'll get a snap summary of your responses. So the question is, where are you in your process to fund IoT systems? Is your answer, we are budgeting and spending money now? We are likely to invest this year? We are considering investing soon? We're going to wait and see? Or we're doubtful to invest? We don't think this is real stuff. So I'll just go through those again, and then we'll go to the responses. So if you could click in your responses now. Where are you in your process to fund IoT systems? We're budgeting and spending money now. We're likely to invest this year. We're considering investing soon. We're going to wait and see. Or we're doubtful to invest. I don't think this is real stuff. So if we can now move to the responses, and this is what we have. So we've got, we're budgeting and spending money now, 36.7%. We're likely to invest this year, 10%. We're considering investing soon, 23.3%. We're going to wait and see, 30%. We're doubtful to invest. We don't think this is real stuff. That's 0%. So that's very promising. So Dwayne, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're going to preview some real-life examples of what we're seeing. We are hearing the words IoT in virtually every meeting that we are having with the telecom customer. I think people are preparing, are starting to invest. I think this is now the part of the market which is real. I think we have gone beyond the theoretics, and from my catbird seat, we do see that the spend is happening.
Great. Okay, that's very good. Well, I'm now going to move on to just an introduction before we hear from Dwayne again. So I often introduce this slide, which looks a little complicated, but actually it gets across a very important point or series of points. This is an illustration of the IoT market or the M2M market before it. And we have 9 key sectors. So we have buildings, energy, computer and home, healthcare, industrial, transportation, retail, safety, security and public safety, and IT and networks. And this illustrates really the main sectors within which there are connected devices to the internet that are then used to create new service opportunities. And on the outside edge, which you probably can't see very well, there are examples of devices in each of those sectors that are attached and then through which new service opportunities are created. So I won't go through all of those because there's a lot of those. In fact, there are over 300 application types on the chart, and then there are considerably more in real life. So basically what this slide is saying is that there's a huge variety of applications in the IoT market. And the other point to note is that individual market growth rates are different. So some of these applications and sectors are growing very much faster than others. There is no particular reason why they should all go in tandem. So what we found in the past, for example, is that the transportation sector, particularly connected cars, connected trucks, things like that, is moving very much faster at the moment than healthcare. But in the future, we would anticipate that healthcare will be a very large sector. Also the energy sector, and also all of the others. So it's worth bearing in mind that this is a multi-speed situation in lots of different sectors. Now moving on to the next slide, this is really just to remind ourselves where IoT came from. And it came from basically the M2M business, which is machine to machine, and before that telemetry and so forth. And a key characteristic of M2M that is pointed out in this slide is that it was basically taking data from one set of connected devices, similar connected devices, through a form of connectivity to a center where it's processed, and then it's distributed wherever, the information is distributed wherever it's needed. So this is one set of devices. It could be, for example, vehicles, it could be trucks or something like that. And then the information, the location-based information is then brought to the center, and then a fleet management application is born. And that's very much a characteristic of the M2M environment. It's focusing on specific business processes. It's what we call silo-based because the information is not shared with any others. And it's fairly unique in its environment. And of course, they're all growing at different rates, as I said earlier. But now we move on to the sort of schema, if you like, of the IoT, which is that you're taking information from a number of different points. And then you're mixing it together, you're sharing it together to create a richer environment of information. Now, those different points might well be all within the same, for example, factory environments. You might be looking at the environment of the factory. You might be looking at a number of different machines in the factory or part of an ongoing process. And then you might map that process in a digital form. And that would then be an IoT type of application in the industrial environment. And in the wider sphere, we've got things like Smart City, which is looking at a number of different applications within a city environment, like parking and bin control or bin management and street lights and all those things. And it's all brought together into one cohesive whole. So that is the plan, and that's really the big difference between where M2M was and IoT is now. It's moving us to a point where there is a sharing of information among quite a lot of broadly based applications and across divides, maybe different organizations as well sharing that information. So here we have then some key market trends in IoT, which we are seeing and have been seeing for the last few years. We're seeing endpoint growth, so the devices out there that are connected to the networks. We're seeing a 20 times growth of those in the period 2016 to 2022. So that's what we have in our own forecasts, and that's a huge growth. So if we have 4 billion devices in 2016, then we're talking about 4 billion times 20 in 2022. Plus, we have much more data per endpoint. It's much more need for richer type of applications, and therefore more data required. And that's put those two together, and you have a huge rise in data traffic requirements. And then there's driven by the need for more richer data for operation optimization, plus a greater emphasis on new service revenues being generated. We have the solutions moving from local to global, a greater internationalization required. We have it's becoming more normal to connect all assets and devices in an enterprise, wherever they are, rather than just a few by exception. So it used to be, we'll connect the few that we can cost effectively connect, and then we won't bother with the rest. But now it's becoming much more a case of it's worthwhile connecting everything, and then there may be some that are more expensive than others, but on average, the story that you get from connecting everything is much more valuable than leaving a few out. So it's a case of perceived value increase versus cost. And then the last point in this slide, multiple forms of connectivity technology are becoming essential. Well, as you get more things connected, you need more different forms of connectivity technology, because not everything can be connected in the same way. So there's a real need for managing all of that in the future environment. So on the next slide, that means that there is, as I say, an increasing need for managing connectivity for everything, everywhere. That's obviously a key thing that is not going to go away, and it's not actually a commodity. It's something that demands new thinking all the time. There is always a case for looking at where a problem is, where a problem has been found in connectivity, in the environment. If connectivity goes down in any particular place, then it's got to be dealt with more effectively than it has in the past, because it's much more critical that it stays up. IoT solutions are moving from a tactical nice to have to a strategic necessity. They're becoming strategic for the enterprise. If there is revenue attached to the new opportunities that it's introducing, then that becomes much more strategic in nature. And it also becomes much more mission critical as well. So even for service support, but particularly when it comes to generating new service revenues, those tend to be much more mission critical than support services. So related to that, high availability is becoming essential for correct operation of these IoT solutions. And as I alluded to in one of my previous slides, there's a need for increasing interoperability with other solutions. There's a need for partners to work together to share data. There's a need for different parts of a service opportunity to work together. And all of this needs to be in real time, and it also needs to be highly secure. There is clearly an increasing need for end-to-end security at all levels within the IoT. We've all heard the scare stories. We've all heard and seen the problems that can arise when security is compromised. As we get more into an age where everything is connected, then it's increasingly important to make sure that security is in place throughout all these IoT solutions. And that leads to, well, a number of roles for telcos. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Dwayne to take us through his view of the market and the opportunities for telcos.
Thank you so much, Robin. A bit of housekeeping. I've heard in the chat at least a few people are having a bit of trouble with the audio. If you can hear me, we are recording this, and you'll have full access to it after the webinar. So fear not if you can't hear every word. But I wanted to thank you, Robin, for taking us through your numbers. You're coming at this from a perspective of looking at it through, I think, a very broad lens. I took a look at the same problem through a telco lens and asked myself, in this reality, who is going to be potentially a winner? Who is going to be under pressure to come up with solutions? And I want to share some numbers from my side of the table that I had researched. Looking just at the numbers, roughly speaking, we've got about 15.5 billion connected devices talking to the internet currently, and we are projecting that will double in only 3 years, potentially double again or more than double again in only a few short years into 2025. And Intel just publicly released their estimate that there could be up to 200 billion connected devices on the internet in 2020. I mean, that is over 20 IP-enabled devices for every man, woman, and child on the planet Earth. It's rather amazing. And we talked about this earlier. I think we're at the point where there is real spend. One estimate describes there's over 700 billion USD being spent on IoT, and that spend is going up over 15% a year. Another estimate says it's just under 300 billion on just the IoT technologies and applications and solution sets. So essentially all the infrastructure needed to run the IoT. Business Insider estimates roughly $6 trillion will be spent on IoT solutions over the next 5 years in cumulative spending. That is rather amazing. So IoT is far beyond a world of an idea. Anything with a $6 trillion market is quite a significant thing to pay attention to. The impact of this is we are seeing that today, roughly 60% of all global manufacturers are using data from connected devices to run their businesses better. That means it is the norm now that you have IoT solutions in your business rather than the exception. So I think we're beyond the threshold of making this idea real. It is real. So you have to ask yourself then, well, who's going to win in this market and why? And I asked myself that, and I have a strong belief that telecoms are going to do very well in this for a couple of reasons. One is there is a data avalanche coming. Robin alluded to it in his figures, but looking at some telecom numbers, mobile data traffic increased last year alone by 63%. Essentially, in 1 year per annum, the increase in traffic was up 63%. It is expected to increase another 700% in the 5 years looking forward. And that's on top of the fact that in the 5 years prior, our mobile traffic volume had increased 18x. I mean, there is clearly a core pedigree that telcos have for being able to handle an ever-increasing, ever-staggering volume of IP data. They've been doing it for quite some time. Cisco estimates in their figures that fixed traffic will grow 21% ongoing. This is terrestrial networks, and mobile networks will continue to grow over 46% a year. So there is just going to be an ever-increasing avalanche of data. And if IoT means an avalanche of data, I would argue that telecoms are probably the world's leading experts in being able to handle avalanches of data. A second reason why I think telecoms can pay attention to IoT is the number of devices. By one estimate, there's about 27 billion connected devices in the network in 2021. That's up from 17 billion devices currently today. And according to certain statistics, M2M modules will account for 51% of all network devices in 2016. So let me translate that again. The vast majority of connected devices are going to be things, not phones, not tablets, not people. So 51% of the net today is an autonomous IoT M2M solution talking to another one. That is the majority, not the minority. It's rather incredible. Let me put a picture frame around that. Looking at the impact to us on a regular basis, Pratt & Whitney last year at the Paris Air Show highlighted an engine. That engine includes 5,000 sensors generating up to 10 gigabytes of data per second. Summing that up, that means on an overnight flight of 12 hours, that's potentially 844 terabytes of data. Now consider that Facebook globally only generates about 600 terabytes of data. I mean, let that sink in. One pair of engines on one aircraft flight will generate more data to analyze and be used than all of Facebook globally per day. There are over 7,000 of these engines on order, and that's just one product from one company. We're talking about zettabytes of information with regards to IoT from just that one product. Cisco estimates, roughly speaking, by 2021, there will be 1.5 connected devices in the net per capita. I mean, Intel, we talked about on the other slide, says roughly, 200 billion. Cisco's a little bit more conservative. That's still 1.5 devices for every man, woman, and child on the earth. So I think telecoms have the pedigree and the infrastructure to handle this many devices simultaneously. They've been proven to be able to do it. The third reason is decisioning. The need to make some intelligent decisions about that data in stream as it's going by. So we know there's a lot of data in IoT. IoT will be less about handling large sums of data. There are many ways to do that, and it's really about deciphering exactly which pieces of data are critical and meaningful and worthy of attention in that ocean of information. Essentially finding and alerting on things like errors in production, lateness in delivery, process anomalies, fraud, security impacts. Really, IoT requires an expertise in finding needles in a haystack, and I would argue that telcos do very well at finding needles in the haystack. You pick up a phone, the one that's in your pocket right now, every time you turn it on, a telco has to authorize you onto the network, dispense the service that you request exactly to your preferences, monitor your balance, monitor your network performance, monitor your treatment, process all of that information, and then decide discrete things to bill you for. An example of something like a video, if you were to watch a movie on your tablet today, there are literally gigabytes of information flowing through the wire, and the only meaningful stuff really to you is the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie, so they know to charge €12 on your bill at the end of that session so that you can pay for your movie. So this concept of being able to manage vast volumes of intermediate data and make core decisions in real time on the very small but very meaningful pieces of that data, I think is a core pedigree and a core skill. Moving onward, I think there are some challenges and some opportunities that we're going to continue to pay attention to if you're a telecom provider and you are looking at IoT. Data speeds and volumes will only continue to increase. I think we've shown those numbers. That data is going to be coming in real time, and therefore decision making is going to have to come in real time as well. Traditional batch processes or fast batch processes will probably not be enough. Reporting to the CEO at the end of the month that you had a major production problem or you had a major failure in your business process, that's useless information. It's really only valuable when it's occurring. So being able to handle real time, and I mean real time within milliseconds at the time of the event, is going to be a core skill required to be successful in IoT. Also, I think IoT changes the business model. Historically, telecoms have built monoliths to manage how they dispense services and how they treat customers. But IoT changes everything because in IoT, the data may belong to the device owner or the end user, but it may also be shared with the manufacturer, the partner, another service provider, a warranty provider, potentially other suppliers or other partners in the network. So this model, which is each device may be both a consumer and a producer of information, is different. And the challenge is that traditional functions in the back office like billing are going to have to be flattened out and bifurcated so that per device, per service, and with great flexibility, you can make decisions on those transactions atomically and figure out what they're worth. So, my challenge and my opportunity for my telco customers is by investing in real-time flexible solutions, you will be able to get ahead of the market. Those inflexible monolithic batch systems of the past are probably not going to be good enough to succeed in IoT. And rounding the corner, stating the obvious, security and control are going to be the centerpieces of the IoT economy. And this means that IoT devices are going to have to connect to multiple networks, requesting and reporting information, and those smarts need to be pushed as close to the edge of the network and the device as possible, guaranteeing that there is security and performance for each of those transactions. I think telcos have a proven pedigree in providing security and performance at the transaction level. I think this will be an advantage for them in the IoT economy. And lastly, I think there's an interconnectivity need, and telcos have a pedigree in doing that. As we described, many devices may have to connect and transverse multiple networks to complete a transaction. Well, who's doing that today? Very well. Well, telecoms are. They interconnect with each other very well, and that concept of having a service cloud and being able to work well with others is a proven part of their heritage. So I think that speaks to their core skills. So in kind of rounding up for me, where I think the market's going, when people ask me, well, what does the future look like for telcos in the IoT economy? We call those companies CSPs, or Communication Services Provider, and I think there's going to be a huge spotlight on that middle word, services. I think IoT is a business revolution, but if you're a telco, it represents an evolution of some of the things that you've been doing very, very well. I think the successful CSP of the future is going to have to lead first by offering a lot of diverse and critical services, not just connectivity and pipe fitting. That probably includes smart infrastructure and meters and devices layered on top of their network. It really is around finding value-added services that you can guarantee to a customer. QoS, high availability, security, all the things that Robin described. Telcos are going to have to provide that as part of their bundle. And potentially enable a platform for integration, because they may not have everything that a customer may need. There might be some bespoke stuff needed in the infrastructure. So I think the CSPs of the future are going to end up being a platform that includes an option to integrate other products like billing and third-party connectivity and other partner solution sets. The other thing about a telecom in the IoT economy is no two customers are going to be alike, and so you may see telcos want to create their own value-added solution sets, and not only just offering the pipes to do it, but offering the services and the tools to allow you to customize the solution to exactly what you want, giving customers options. Like I said, additional interfaces, additional deployment options, public, private, or hybrid cloud, maybe even end-to-end operational management, I think are going to be in the basket, in the wheelhouse of a telco providing that in the future of IoT. I liken IoT to kind of the trend of electrification. 100 years ago, electrification was a very bespoke process. Each solution set was custom. Everybody that wanted electricity in a factory had to build their own generators, and they had different frequencies and different hertz and different voltages. Well, that eventually all became standardized, and as a result, those customers could focus really on running their business and innovating their businesses rather than building infrastructure. And I think, much like electrification, IoT will form the trend of datafication, allowing these telco providers to create standards and interconnectivity options so that businesses can worry about running their business rather than building infrastructure. So I think there are great examples of this happening today. Nokia just announced Wing, the worldwide IoT networking grid. Huawei just announced Ocean. All of the traditional telco providers are now becoming true service providers. So I think in summary, I would tell you that telcos really do have an expertise that I think will play well in the IoT economy. They're experts in handling diverse data at high speeds and in huge volumes, and guaranteeing security and performance interconnected to each other. So I think this is a really exciting time to be a telco, and I think IoT is an exciting market for you. I'm going to give you a very brief example of what some of our customers are doing in the IoT economy. VoltDB is a database we would be characterized as a fast database in the spectrum of other vendor solution sets. And right now, we are being used in well over 70 million smart meters all over Europe and Asia. We've done this by instrumenting the network with a comprehensive system that autonomously collects the data, creates the revenue stream for that information, is reporting back reliability and statistics, and it allows our customers to not only get accurate bills, but enables the customer that this is designed for to really focus on running their business and allow the network out there to focus their energies on the anomalies and not on the operation of the network. So building autonomous smarts into the network that allows you to focus on the right things to do in a highly chatty network rather than everything in the network. And we came in there with a fast data solution because low latency and a large volume of requests was really something that you couldn't do in traditional systems. Moving on to another example, there's a large internet provider in Japan. We are using a solution based on fast data and VoltDB to monitor, analyze, and manage all the real-time traffic to detect and mitigate DDoS attacks. So this is where, hackers will come in and try to take down your network. Well, that adaptive learning, that changes. Those attacks vary widely, and as more information is learned in the network, how that network has to adapt to defend itself needs to be a real-time process, and we're doing that based on VoltDB's technology. So there's an intelligent and extraordinary high-speed decision-making process to essentially discover and detect and defend across all of these attacks in the network. And I think this is a really unique way. The network is itself becoming more aware and intelligent and allowing the operational side of the business to focus on what matters rather than everything. So I think when we talk about IoT and M2M and machine learning and artificial intelligence, we are seeing that component of fast data become a cornerstone need in any solution set. So I'll just wrap up. I mean, in my world, I think that there really is no one better positioned for success in IoT than today's telco providers. I think IoT is a business revolution in the market, but as I said earlier, I think for telcos, it's an evolution of their core skills. So I think this is an exciting time to be a telecom, and I think IoT is real. I think the marriage of those two worlds is going to create a pretty exciting economy ongoing. So, Robin, I'm going to turn it back over to you because I think I'd like to ask another poll question.
Great. That's super. Thank you very much, Dwayne. So, yes, we have another poll question for you, which is what do you think has the most, or who do you think has the most to win in IoT? Is it traditional telcos? Is it internet leaders like Google and Amazon? Is it system integrators like IBM, Accenture? Or is it IT departments? So I'll just go through those again. Who do you think has the most to win in IoT? Is it traditional telcos? Is it internet leaders like Google and Amazon? Is it system integrators like IBM and Accenture? Or is it IT departments? So if you could type your answer in now, and we'll get straight to the answers. So we have traditional telcos, 38.2%, internet leaders, 32.4%, which is interesting because it's perhaps not obvious that internet leaders would be lower than traditional telcos. System integrators, 26.5%, and then IT departments, 2.9%. Well, that's an interesting set of responses, I think, Dwayne. What do you think?
I think it is rather interesting, and I like the fact that, interestingly, internet leaders and traditional telcos are highly ranked, and I guess it begs the question in my mind, how much of a difference are we going to see between those two in the future? I mean, when AT&T is building service clouds and Google is laying fiber, where's the blurry line between running an internet business and running a telecom network? I don't know that line isn't going to get a lot more gray and close together ongoing. So all of this makes sense to me. And when you look at folks like, IBM and Accenture, they too are building services clouds. They too are building, practices around pre-integrating all of these devices together. So I think TBD is my answer. I think traditional telcos are going to be strong winners here. I guess what I would conclude is I think everybody else is going to start to look a lot more like a traditional telco, and telcos are going to start to have characteristics of some traditional internet providers.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, so what about the internet leaders like Google and Amazon? Do you see them becoming more like telcos?
Well, Google have, in the States, built tens of thousands of kilometers of dark fiber, and they're lighting up cities strategically. So when you select your internet provider at home, your phone service, your television service, your internet service, that can be a Google bill that lands in your post box. So yes, Google has strongly raised their hand to get into that market. I think Amazon has, in my opinion, gotten into the market from an infrastructure as a service, a platform as a service, an application provider. They're not necessarily laying fiber to your house, but once you're in the cloud, Amazon is thrilled to keep you in their cloud. So I do see that those fingerprints in the world of IoT and cloud services are definitely there.
Great. Okay, very good. Well, we're going to have a Q&A session now. Do get your questions into us, and we'll go through them as we get them. So anytime, just send your questions in now, and we'll get through them. Now, the first one, Dwayne, is what kinds of applications are leading the way in terms of IoT deployments? Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I think in general, what we talked about on the earlier slides is I think you have, sort of first to market are the high volume, financially meaningful types of use cases. So to me, that's industrial automation, process management, alerting and alarming, and security. There's clearly a market for managing that. And, an example would be, technically, the Internet of Things includes a use case where your tea kettle can alert your phone when your tea gets a little bit too warm, or too cold, I'm sorry. I mean, it's fascinating. It's wonderful to do, but I don't think there's necessarily a lot of revenue. Where there is an enormous amount of revenue is shipments of thousands of cars are arriving from a dock somewhere and are distributed throughout a country, or food is distributed throughout the countryside, and the temperature control on that is absolutely essential to keep everything fresh. Or medical supplies must be tracked carefully because there's vaccines and lives at stake. I think those high volume, financially impactful use cases are going to be first to market, first to revenue. So automation, process management, alerting, alarming, security, et cetera. That's my opinion. If you have some thoughts.
Okay. No, that's great. Well, we got a lot of questions coming in now, so I'll get on to the next one. The big question is, what is the business case for a telco? Just providing connectivity with a majority using only little data will not bring a sustainable business for a telco.
Well, I think, if I read that question correctly, I think the world of telco, the history of being a mere pipe fitter is not going to be enough. So we don't have to look very far back to see that the person that builds the widest pipe for the cheapest cost may not survive. When you look at companies that are leading this revolution, companies like Nokia, AT&T, BT, Telefonica, their investment is in value-added services. So not only guaranteeing that the transaction can safely get from one end of the network to the other, but making sure it's done securely at the right price with complete guaranteed accuracy every single time. It's that ability to add value in the cloud and in the network that I think will differentiate the winners from the has-beens. That's my opinion, though.
Okay. No, that's fine. So the next one is, one of the biggest problems telcos have is that they do not have the knowledge and expertise to connect into the vertical industries. That's where they need to work with system integrators. Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that. And what I would also tell you is when we look back on the slides from before, when I talked about what's the vision of a CSP for the future, one of the things that we talked about there is all customers are unique, and we may not have everything. And if you're a telecom provider, you may not have everything. So value-added services are great, but you may be a platform provider providing integration options and third-party partnering options in your network just in case somebody needs to build bespoke, just in case an integrator needs to do something unique for that customer. So all customers are unique, and I think telcos will embrace that diversity and embrace that challenge. And I think systems integrators are the way to go for that. In some cases, do telcos have vertical expertise? I would probably guess they would argue they have some expertise. I would agree with the questioner that systems integrators probably have the most expertise to bring, and I think there's a core place for everyone. Yeah. So working as a team rather than individually. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So there's another one then, is a more general one. What do you see as telco's biggest challenge in IoT?
Well, I think for
probably not just one, actually, probably several.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think right now it's alluding to the concept that you're going to need to be a bigger solution set than a pipe. You're going to need to figure out what are the value-added services that you can provide. Some of that's core, security, billing, partnering. You may also end up providing other services that are needed, integration services, device management services, end-to-end operational management. There may even be some opportunities where telcos provide a diverse revenue choice, just like they're doing with certain internet services. This is your free version of the service, and this is your premium version of the service. The one includes advertising and data sharing, and the other one does not. So I think the challenge if you're a telco is how do you find a way to figure out the appeal and the unique fit that you have for each of your customers? How can you add value to each of their business needs and each of their transactions in a way that suits the end customer? The model that telcos were used to for so long is we're going to build a monolith and you're going to use it. And we knew exactly what services were in the stack. Well, IoT changes all of that. Your customers are now in control and your customers are telling you what your network must do. So I think that is the big challenge, is figuring out how to be flexible and meet the needs of your customers.
Very good. Okay. Completely different topic now. What are your insights for low power wide area contribution in the turnover of telecoms? So that's the low power wide area, low data rate connectivity options that are now coming into the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on it. I believe that you're correct. The ARPU on that is low compared to other choices. That said, anything at enough scale may be a market. You know, there were pioneers in the telco game that figured out a way to create a profit on an $8 per month bill in the third world when everyone thought that was an addressable market. But I think that the questioner is correct. That is probably traditionally a lower ARPU, but I think it just depends on the use case. I mean, if it's a low ARPU and it doesn't take a lot of work to manage it, is there still a profit to be made? Perhaps. Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I think the other point is that there's an awful lot more of those types of connections around. We've been talking about large numbers of connected devices. A lot of those connected devices have very low data rates. So it's a different sort of model. It's rather than having a few large ARPU or large data rate applications, it's having many low data rate applications, and they become part of the overall mix of the environment. Really, what's being seen in the environment. But I think that one thing that we should probably stress is that it's not just the connectivity; it's making value from that connectivity, from the data that goes with it, and there's certainly, as you were saying earlier, Dwayne, a real role for telcos to participate in that higher value definition of what can be used, what's valuable for enterprises and also for consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the good news or bad news. I don't think we need to have an answer today. This is so dynamic and so fast changing and so challenging of an industry. I think we're going to be in a really fun period of time to watch all of this stuff come together. Right.
Here's a bit of a related question, actually. How does the team view competitive threat from deregulated spectrum providers impact on traditional telcos?
Yeah, I saw that one as well. I'm not an expert on deregulated spectrum providers necessarily. Presumably, there are presumably that might be small cell deployments or something. I don't really know. I guess what I would say is if you've got a solution set like that, you may have a customer base, but I would argue that certain other added services on top of that, billing, security, SLA management, application integration, potentially even advertising, potentially revenue splitting, those kinds of value-added services will likely be a factor in who wins the IoT, because from an end-to-end standpoint, being just a pipe fitter to connect the one packet of data from one side of the room to the other, I don't know that that's going to be enough to be a global leader. Honestly, I just don't know enough about deregulated spectrum providers to give an intelligent answer.
Okay. I think there is another point here, and that is that we see lots of new connectivity types coming into the marketplace, and they all have a part to play in the overall scheme of connecting as many things as possible. Sometimes the deregulated space is cheaper and it's more immediate and it's provides a good answer, and sometimes it doesn't. So I think that it depends on the application. I think that when you put it all together, there's going to be a business for regulated and deregulated space, and it's a question of how much more than whether there will be any. I think there's going to be so many different types of devices that need to be connected. Everybody needs to find their own space, their position in the marketplace, and then specialize in that and go for that. And your costs in approaching that market will be dictated by that approach. So I think that there is huge opportunities in all of the areas, both regulated and deregulated, and it's more a case of just finding the right applications to make that business plan work. Let's move on to another one. This is, do you see the cable companies like Comcast as having an advantage over a telco like AT&T from a fiber and Wi-Fi perspective? Well, don't want you to pick sides here, Dwayne, but...
Yeah. I would love your thoughts as well. I mean, my thoughts on it are, when you deal with terrestrial technologies that cable providers have, one strong advantage is obviously speed and capacity. You can have gigabit speeds on the wire, and wireless technologies haven't caught up to that speed yet. So that is one advantage. The other thing that cable providers have done very well is to accumulate content and media. When you're looking at folks like the cable providers, they're very, very good at essentially capturing and delivering content, which is, again, that value-added piece that we talked about earlier. So I think they may have some strong advantages. I guess we'll see what happens to the AT&Ts of the world. When you look at the Verizons of the world buying AOL, it probably wasn't for their email application, it's for their content. So I think they see the writing on the wall as well.
Okay, right. So the next question is, since the ARPU is low in IoT, what can telcos do to get in the chain? All of them claim to have IoT platforms. Will they succeed? Do you have a view on that?
Well, I was going to say, when you say the broad statement of ARPU is low in IoT, I guess it would depend really specifically on the application.
Yeah, it does.
So
you're right.
Pratt & Whitney dealing with a multi-10 million pound engine and monitoring all that data didn't occur by accident. It's because the value of that data in preventing downtime and managing maintenance and keeping billion-dollar industries like airliners afloat has a tremendous value. So I don't know that it's true that all ARPU is low in IoT, but in terms of getting in on the chain, I think it's, again, the real value is there's so much data. Where is your core skill? It is the data and finding the needles in the haystack, those pieces of critical information to pay attention to in an ocean of noise. So yes, all telcos have an IoT platform. What's the niche? Is it security? Is it performance? Is it guaranteed data accuracy? Is it guaranteed billing? Is it, partnering, revenue sharing? There certainly are value-added ways that you can add on to the IoT story versus just transaction processing.
That's very good. Okay. And the next one is, do you see any impact of data privacy concerns on the growth of IoT?
Yeah, in my experience, and I worked out of Europe for about a decade, privacy concerns are absolutely critical. You can't open a newspaper today without seeing a CEO get sacked for a data breach. And I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier in the world of, the CSP of the future. That flexibility to include a platform option so that certain pieces of data or certain transactions may live on a premise-based solution or a hybrid cloud or a public cloud, or essentially allowing the customer to end assemble their solution as they see fit so that privacy information is managed internally, and operational data that is not distinctive and does not have PII can be managed in a different system. I think the real value of the telco is providing options to customers to do that rather than prescriptions for exactly what to do.
Okay, very good. Then the next one is, do you think that geographical expansion, new markets and countries of telecoms through IoT offerings is more possible than through traditional telecom services? I think what this is getting at is that traditionally telcos have been nationally based, whereas IoT is much more of an international thing. So does it provide telcos with more of an opportunity to expand geographically?
Yeah, my gut says it does. What I am not an expert on is regulations at the geopolitical level in terms of how do you get a spectrum license in each country, and whether you can transverse those borders with IoT information. Is that different than PII information for consumers? I don't really know. I do see the one thing that IoT does offer is scale, meaning when you're selling traditional telco services, you're selling generally to people or businesses made up of people. You have to market to them. You have to do customer care and manage that stuff at a pretty small level. With IoT, that solution set is enormous potentially and scalable, to an even larger thing. So if you were to manage an entire company's manufacturing network across Latin America, that may be a way that you can literally have a much more addressable market, a much more scalable market, a much more reliable revenue stream. So I think geo expansion may be a strong incentive to look to IoT solutions. Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Here's a question on a specific market sector, which maybe I can help with actually. So what is your opinion on when the healthcare sector will take off with IoT applications? Do you want to start with that one, Dwayne, and I'll perhaps add to that?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because I was just recently in hospital, and you can't do anything without a barcode in a hospital these days. Everything that they touched, everything that they handed me, every result was scanned, and automated and electronically sorted and amalgamated into records. I mean, it loosely looked like an incredibly precise manufacturing process. So healthcare IoT is for sure, I think, going to follow the model of M2M and IoT. All of these pieces of data are going to have to be talking to each other. The interfaces are going to have to be standardized. The transactions are going to have to be guaranteed. The security and the privacy need to be guaranteed. Yeah, I think there's a lot of fingerprints in our experience with M2M that are going to fit the healthcare model. What do you think?
Well, yes, there will be, and the case is yes, there will be. I think the situation with healthcare is that it's all very much bound up in national health services, which then take quite a long time to actually get new ideas implemented that have not got a track record of being used before. So it's more a case of getting through the system and getting things implemented. And typically things like IoT applications start as trials, and then they progress forward into larger implementations, and then they get what's the word? They get adopted. That's the word. In a larger scale, and that can take quite a bit of time, particularly if the health service is not well endowed with financial resources, put it that way. So I think that some of these things can take much longer than they anticipate. I think we all anticipate that remote patient monitoring and all sorts of related services, which IoT has a great opportunity at providing for, are going to be very big opportunities in the future, not least of all because it will free up hospital beds and provide for care in the community, and the chances are that people are likely to recover more quickly in a home environment than in a hospital environment. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that's correct. But it's a case of getting it through the system and implemented, and that has taken a great deal longer than was originally anticipated, but is now beginning to happen. I think it's beginning to happen particularly in the US market, much more slowly in the European markets. Would you have a view about that?
You know, I think that there are examples both ways. I think, you know, we're talking about this problem right now as it stands. One of the more, I guess, blunt ways to think about this is through automation and through standardization, there may be tremendous cost savings, depending. And that may be the incentive for some of these national services to adopt these technologies in mass, which is we can just do our job better, faster, and cheaper than we were doing it yesterday. So while some national services are traditionally a little more conservative to adopt solutions, I think IoT might offer that possibility to save a lot of money, and that may be the incentive. In terms of the U.S. market, I think it really depends. My hospital's quite innovative. Everything is digital. I'm sure that's not, you know, consistent depending on where you are. So wait and see, I suppose, is my answer. Okay.
All right. One more question, which is actually going back to low power wide area. The emerging low power wide area network ARPU will be very low. Does it still make sense for telcos to address IoT? I think we've actually probably pretty partially answered this question. I don't know if you have anything more to add to that.
No, you know, I'm not an expert on essentially those examples. What I can tell you is the people that I'm speaking with, my telco customers and their end customers, they are deploying these solutions for a reason. There is a need for the solution. There is enough of a concern for getting the data that they can make the investment in it. So in terms of whether it's a good investment for a telco, I think it really depends on the customer use case, but I am not seeing those solutions go away. I'm only seeing them being invested in, so there must be something there.
Indeed, yes, okay. Well, we're out of time actually now, so thank you, Dwayne. I think that's given us a really good insight into what telcos can offer and the challenges and the opportunities ahead for telcos. Before we go, I'd like to say a big thank you to Dwayne from VoltDB. So thank you, Dwayne, for your participation in the webinar.
And thank you, Robin, for yours, and to all that joined us. Thank you very much for your time wherever you are. And if we didn't get to your questions, we did capture them, and we'll try to get back to you on an individual basis.
Great. Yes. So I'd just like to add my voice to that. I'd like to thank all of you who've joined us wherever you are today. We really appreciate the time you've spent with us and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. So bye for now. This webinar is now over.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.